I'd like to welcome our stellar panel who have kindly accepted our invitation to talk about one of the most pressing issues of our time, the need for commerce to be based on a much more equitable and fair model than it currently is, powered by Web3 technology. We have Sheila Warren, member of the Executive Committee of the World Economic Forum, Sandra, CEO of the Global Blockchain Business Council, GBBC, Lisa Gansky, entrepreneur, author, and advisor at Boson Protocol, Justin Banon, co-founder at Boson Protocol, and I'm Patrick Degenhardt, VP of Marketing at Boson Protocol. So let's start with you, Lisa. You are such a recognized thinker and author in this space, writing about the sharing economy way back when many people did not foresee the shortfalls that will lay ahead. Would you tell us a little bit about the original promise of Web 2 and how that turned out in the end?
Well, sure, I would be delighted to. I should start by saying that Web 1.0 of the web was our enthusiastic idea that we were going to have a level playing field of content, and in a way, it looked like it was going that way. And Web 1 was very classically, content with a little smear of commerce. Web 2, when we started to engage with it, was really the promise of kind of level playing field and really open, inclusive access for the other part, which is community. And so the idea of having real access to each other was and applying some of what we thought were the fundamental principles of the internet to that was extremely exciting. I think that if we look back at the idea of, what does it mean if we have open access? And what does it mean if everyone can participate in value creation and also hopefully in how value is captured? For me, like when I was writing about the sharing economy, my great weird compliment was my neighbor in Berkeley called me a communist, which, which coming from Berkeley was quite a comment. So, I've been very much keen on this idea of a more equitable, inclusive approach for many, many years. And the promise of Web 2 fundamentally was about social change, was about kind of making the technology not be so the sea of dudes-ish, and focused on kind of a Silicon Valley ethic and much more inclusive. And I think that what happened was, I think we're all familiar with the drug lord model, which is, first one's free. I think that what happened was this really seductive promise of a commons, of a digital commons, of a data commons, and of a kind of global commons in a way, a chance for us to participate together, was we were seduced into free. And the free services that were ending up being offered, in fact, for many people, are fundamental to how they communicate with their friends and family, with their governments. And so that seduction, the sort of candy-laced opportunity for a singular owner of a platform to control transparency, value creation, value capture, governance, all of it got kind of pulled back into, I think what, at Boson we generally refer to as the super extraction model. And I have to say that that's kind of was a major disappointment. When I wrote about the sharing economy, which was in 2009, it really came out of this idea that we need ecologically, economically, and socially a lot more empathy and inclusion. Maybe there's an opportunity to use some of the strategies that we have with digital towards physical sharing. When I think back to Web 2.0, the beginning of it, some of the brilliant services that I think about my friend Scott Hefferman, who started Meetup, and he used to say that the opportunity is, we're all sitting in our homes writing emails, looking at YouTube, creating things, but really, like, when it's about getting together in the end. It's about creating more community, more empathy, and accelerating that aspect. And I think, many of the services, whether it was Flickr or YouTube or Meetup or things like Patients Like Me, a lot of those services were people to people oriented. What went wrong, I think, was that I always think about the Robert Kennedy comment that about GDP, and he basically, I don't want to screw up the quote too much, but the basic quote was something like a gross national product. In short, it measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. So I think that what happens a lot with capitalist models is that the value capture gets consolidated and squeezes all the juice out of value creation. I'm really excited myself about Web3 because it's an opportunity. Once again, we're at that fork in the road where we have a chance to co-create and to rethink, especially around governance. So I know that people on the panel have a lot of amazing expertise, including you, Patrick, in this topic. So I'm going to be excited to hear what they want to cook up.
Awesome. So let's grab this hook and ask Sheila. With your work at the World Economic Forum, Sheila, in the last few years have been doing so much for blockchain space. Grabbing this hook from Web 2 to Web 3, what do you think the promises of Web 3 are?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here today to have this conversation with this incredible panel. I want to just kind of hearken to what Lisa was describing as this evolution that we've kind of gone through. And it really, I think it's a societal evolution where we've seen the limitations of the ways we as a society interact and use technology. And we thought, we can do better. We can create a better vision where we're not engaging in this very extractive model of capitalism. Maybe we're shifting to a model that is really much more about equitable allocation of risk and reward. So we are looking at a stakeholder set. We're thinking about externalities like climate, the earth, planet, people, other societies, right? Or other communities that we may not necessarily be a part of, but how our actions, especially in a digital environment, affect those communities. And so I think that, to me, the promise of Web3 is it's really almost a way of how do we engage with each other? How do we communicate as a society? How do we interact as a society? How do we coordinate our resources? And how do we ensure that we're doing that in a way that can take into consideration the missteps that have come before? Now, some of those missteps were the result of deliberately extractive models, and some were almost just incidental to the flow of the way commerce tended to function and how ecosystems were built around that. So to me, I echo a lot of what Lisa said. I think that Web3 systems, with their open, equitable, distributed nature, have a chance. We have a chance now to think in a different way about sustainability, about accessibility, about all these things that as a society, most of us anyway, claim to care passionately about and deeply about, that have not been working for a lot of communities and people around the world. So to me, it's empowerment, it's agency, it is providing just a framework for how we live together, and how we, as our literally the places on the earth that we can live get smaller and smaller and smaller, sadly, and we move more and more into an intermediated online environment that's where we have a digital and real world experience that kind of intersect with each other more and more dramatically, I think. And as that gets more and more commonplace for new and upcoming generations, I think that we need to fundamentally rebuild the way that we interact with each other. And Web3 is what that's about to me. So how that's going to affect, I think, consumers and commerce is a really interesting question. But my hope is that the models that we're building will remain focused on, like I said, this equitable allocation of risk and reward that has at the heart this idea that we should all be agents of our own actions and activities, but we should also be held accountable for the way that those actions impact the communities, not just the ones which that we consider ourselves a member, but even the ones that we don't consider ourselves members of as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it connects very well also with the work that GBBC does, Sandra, right? In terms of coordination, creating the frameworks for a more equitable internet and, well, blockchain and Web3. What are your views in terms of the promises of Web3?
Absolutely. And thank you very much, Patrick and Justin, the entire Boson team, for having me here today. GBBC was founded on that very premise, which is we could see that there would be incredible wealth generation, trillions and trillions of dollars equivalent being created with these technologies in Web3. Here's the ultimate question to all of us as leaders. We can't believe that it's just going to somehow magically, equitably distribute itself out and not get concentrated again in specific pockets if we allow it. So as leaders in the space, and GBBC's critical mission is that we are looking to build bridges, creating opportunities around the world so that everyone has a chance, and that the education is also fairly distributed so that people have access to the information to be able to create a company. People also need the ability to have the capital to be able to form their startups and their organizations. And I think the one thing about what's going on in Web3 and Metaverse in particular, with the pandemic and all of us having been isolated, is that we're beginning to see that some of these paradigm shifts are really breaking. And the one that I look to right now, and I'm spending a little bit more time understanding, is when you look at Axie Infinity, which didn't exist about a year ago, and you look at how it's lifted actually quite a number of young people in the Philippines out of poverty. They actually have a job gaming. And you could argue, well, is that really a job? And I think if you were to ask a lot of people in the former generations, they would say that can't be a job. But actually, in the digital economy, why can't it be a job? And why can't being participating in a DAO or participating in any community be a job, and something you enjoy and can actually get financial benefit from doing so? And so I think what we're beginning to see is fundamental shifts in how we look at not only the nature of work and our skills and how we interact with each other, but how do we, with the ability that we have today, as leaders, to sort of write new rules of the road or new rules, the new rule book, how do we make it more fair and write that in? And I think that's something that's really important. And it's incumbent upon all of us to keep pushing back on sort of the status quo of just letting things happen and evolve.
Yeah, I really like your analogy with the gaming world and everything like that, and how Web3 creates these new opportunities, right, that we didn't even consider in the past. And Justin, I know that you are a firm believer in Web3, and Lisa just mentioned before about the seduction of free from Web2, right? So how would you see the opportunity for Web3 to correct this misalignment of incentives that we saw in Web2?
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. And great points by Sheila and Sandra and Lisa as well. I mean, my sort of background is I both studied Web2, so I learned the playbook, and I applied it and built headed up a platform that's very successful in extracting. And for me, I agree with the likes of Christix and a number of others that it's, this extraction is not optional, it's an imperative. And having run, a sort of $1 billion platform before, that is the aim. It's maximal extraction. In actual fact, extraction in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. Blockchain protocols such as Boson Protocol need to extract. It's just in a minimal, sustainable, balanced, and equitable way. And so, the whole structure of having a group of shareholders who are separate to users, and then having an organization that is in such a dominant market position that it can abuse that market power to do things like hoard data and engage in market distorting activities is it's inevitable, and executives in that position are actually they have almost like a fiduciary responsibility to maximize shareholder value and to do that through extraction. So the promise of Web3 is, firstly, a recognition of this imperative, and then putting in place mechanisms that mean that these platforms can't be evil. I mean, we've all heard of the kind of Google, don't be evil. Well, what we're building at Boson is a mechanism, is a protocol that will be like the TCP/IP of commerce, that when you want to engage in commerce, you can use Boson. But the difference is that we are hard coding this and kind of like throwing away the keys so that even the founders cannot later on change those rules. And that's what Web3 is about. It's the difference between making this promise, and all Web2 platforms, don't be evil, having this veneer of do good, very expensive PR firms, but an extraction imperative, and replacing that with transparency and can't be evil. It's not, you're not relying on the enduring benevolence of the founders. It's a platform that cannot be evil.
Excellent. This is a really, really good point. And that brings me to our next topic in this conversation, which is the metaverse, right? Sandra, the GBBC has been working on enabling blockchain to be a more secure, equitable, and functional enabler for society, right? How do you see metaverses playing a role in that, right? You already have all these blockchain work streams. What about the metaverse?
So we're at the very beginning, I think, of a multi-year, decade journey. Very exciting. Hope to be on it with all of you. I do think where we are seeing the greatest potential is the public-private sector collaboration to be able to offer, for example, government services in a way that is the virtual embassy that was just announced today by the government of Barbados, that they will be doing that. The government of Seoul, South Korea has announced that they will be the first meta city out there, and they're going to be delivering a bunch of their services virtually. Not every service, but there are some where it lends to facilitating in a virtual world, and perhaps also then engaging your citizenry in a way that instills trust, allows for transparency, accountability. And let's face it, we see the statistics over and over again of how low the trust factor is anywhere in the world, pretty much, of citizens to their government. And I think if there was ever an opportunity beyond the very exciting things that are going on right now in the arts and for creators and in gaming, I think there's this sort of like pragmatic metaverse applications for government to its citizens.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it takes me back to the point that Sheila made before, Sheila, about the framework and creating the coordination between these different players, right? You talked about governments, cities, of course, companies. So what are your thoughts about that, Sheila, in terms of interoperable metaverses, creating common goods for the metaverse?
Well, I think that the question of capture within a metaverse is a really important one. And the extent to which we replicate kind of a Web2 model where you have to have some sort of walled garden of a metaverse and everything that happens in there is controlled by one actor, whoever that actor is, public, private sector, doesn't necessarily matter, even a civil society actor, is kind of the antithesis, I think, of what we've been talking about and what we all are, the world we're trying to usher into being in our own ways. And so I think that it isn't even so much about interoperability of metaverses, it's about the agency of an individual within a particular metaverse to be able to, take their toys and go somewhere else kind of thing, right? Like things that are very hard to do now with the way that the rules around data, the norms around data kind of work. So yes, there's privacy protection, but you don't really own that content once you've shared it, in these online platforms and settings. So I think there's an element where you have to think about the interoperability is about portability. It's about the ability to kind of decide where you want to be, both online and in the real world, and how you want to yourself determine the path or progress that you take, through this reality that we're already part of it. And we're recording this digitally, right? Like online, we're not in the same place. So these are things that are very commonplace to a certain sector of society. I also think it's really important to land the point that not everybody is familiar or comfortable or digitally fluent in these environments. So the pandemic, I think someone has earlier said, and I agree with this, it accelerated a lot of this activity significantly because so many of us had to become comfortable with or many of us already were, and we're kind of excited about this, but regardless, you kind of, if you're a knowledge worker in certain communities where you had good internet access, you had good connectivity, you spent a lot of your time, in a virtual environment, engaging with other people. And so, but there's a lot of society that for whom that is not the reality, and that was not the case. And they were still taking on tremendous risk to go be frontline workers or healthcare or whatever it was. And I worry that the interoperability of metaverses will not consider the real world component as well, and will not be factoring in people that need to, whether it's education or whether it's opportunity, whether it's connectivity, whatever it is, right? Will they be able to engage in that same world? So to me, it's interoperability in the broadest sense. And it, again, fundamentally needs to come down to a focus on empowerment and agency of individuals and communities. And if we start with that, I think, as our touchstone, is the place we go back to when making policy, when making business decisions, whatever it might be, design. If that is what we are focusing on, then my hope is that that is going to orient us at least in the right direction, such that we are thinking more about the needs of communities, individuals, than we are about the particular container in which activities are happening. So that's kind of what I would say on the topic of interoperability. It is much less than a technical question. It's really kind of a cultural and social question, and one of prioritization.
Yeah, I totally agree, and we all feel very passionate about that. So I want to ask Justin if we need to have this open metaverse economy from now on to guarantee all of these points that Sheila and Sandra were mentioning. How does Boson Protocol support that?
Absolutely. So Boson Protocol enables the exchange of digital value, monetary value, for a physical thing between a buyer and a seller without the need for an extractionary intermediary. So, we've likened it to being like the TCP IP of commerce. So Boson represents, if you like a commerce bridge between these virtual worlds and the physical world, and one that is kind of locked open and is sort of resistant to capture by kind of centralized actors, or as we might call them, sort of like kind of trolls, if you like. And so, as commerce is such an important part of an economy, we are this foundational primitive for enabling an open metaverse economy.
Excellent. It's a vital role. Lisa, how do you see this interoperability infrastructure for blockchain in the metaverse? Companies like Boson Protocol or other Web3 players, even Decentraland, as we were just looking at that, and Sandbox. How do you see that? What's the role?
I think the fundamental, my view of the metaverse is that it kind of gives us a space for regenerating trust and empathy in a social way. Even though, it's a digital space, there's an opportunity for collisions that can drive us towards empathy and understanding, and building kind of a new social architecture, a new social operating system for communities, for cities, for dealing with, because right now, fundamentally, I think, both Sheila and Sandra were saying that the web of trust is broken, right? That whether you're talking about civic duty or a private industry, there's trust in institutions is kind of the no more part. And what we're looking at here with the metaverse is building together something that's the not yet. If we squint, we can see the future, but it's not. It hasn't come into full focus. It's not really articulated. There's not practices and standards. So what Justin was talking about with respect to Boson, and what's so for me, and I'm sure for you all, compelling about blockchain fundamentally is the idea that that is trustless, that the governance fundamentally can be something that's created together, and that in fact, it's not a public company that is in service to shareholders. It's a publicly held, it's collaborative intelligence. It's collective value creation and governance and democratic management of something. So I think that once again, I'm extremely hopeful for Web3 because I have seen us kind of kick the can down the road, and the belt and suspenders weren't in place to manage the gravitational pull that tends to make human enterprises be distorted in the benefit of the people who are usually running them and who have the most to gain. So I think that's where I come out, is the metaverse is a kind of new ecology for 21st century infrastructure. And that infrastructure is a way for us to not only deliver things like food and shelter and energy and water, but it's also a way for us to regenerate our societal fabric that I feel a lot of the social media and other things have accelerated the demise of. So I might be putting too much hope into the on-ramp of the metaverse, but I think that it's a pretty compelling playground for all of us.
Yeah, truly amazing. Guys, I think we could spend the night talking about these topics. We're also passionate about that, but the time is running out. So I'd like to thank you so much. It has been really a pleasure. I think we'll have other conversations together about that for sure. Everybody stay tuned for more amazing talks at Boson Forum, and see you later.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye. It's a pleasure.